Hey YouTube, how you doing? This is Reviewer97, and today I'm going to be reviewing the 1958 edition of Dracula, entitled in the US Horror of Dracula. And I have that on a 4 collector set by TCM, Turner Classic Movies. It's an amazing film. It's a brilliant piece of work. Christopher Lee playing Count Dracula is just amazing just to see him, the way he performs. And Peter Cushing as Dr. Van Helsing probably gives him the best, one of the best roles of his career. So without further ado, we're going to get into Horror of Dracula. Jonathan Harker travels to Castle Dracula to meet Count Dracula on taking a job up as his librarian. He arrives at Castle Dracula to find no one is home and a note from the Count himself, which Count Dracula has apologized for not being able to meet him and leaves him some food to eat. During the middle of his meal, he runs into a female. And she asks for his help and he denies it. Then the Count shows up. The Count is played by Christopher Lee, who is probably one of the most famous actors ever to play the role of Count Dracula, alongside Bela Lugosi. Once he has met Count Dracula, Dracula acts as a gentle host and takes him to his room, and even offers to carry his suitcase for him. Once they arrive in his room, Count Dracula gives him the key to his library and also sees a picture of Jonathan's soon-to-be wife, Lucy Holmwood. Only short time after this, Jonathan realizes he is locked in his room, and once he gets out of his room, he runs into the female mistress again, who all of a sudden begs for his help again. This time he accepts, but only to find out she is Dracula's bride, and she actually tries to bite his neck. She succeeds, and right as she does succeed, the Count shows up, and he tries to get her away from Jonathan to say that he is mine and he's going to be my prisoner. Only moments after that, Jonathan sleeps through his whole next day, and it is almost nighttime once again, and Jonathan realizes he has become a vampire as seeing the bite marks on his neck. He then sets out to kill the Count and his beautiful mistress, but after killing Dracula's beautiful mistress, he then becomes a prisoner in Count Dracula's castle. Only moments after that, Dr. Van Helsing, played by Peter Cushing, who was another famous Hammer horror actor who had previously played the role of Dr. Frankenstein in The Curse of Frankenstein the year before. He arrives to realize that Jonathan Harker has been turned into a vampire and is only left to do one thing to liberate his soul, which is to stake him through his chest. He then goes to see the Holmwoods, which he goes to see Arthur, played by Michael Goff, and his wife Mina, played by Melissa Siebling, to tell him the tragic death of Jonathan Harker, but yet they don't want to tell Lucy due to the fact that they don't want to disappoint her, until Count Dracula actually has been going after Lucy after seeing the picture that Jonathan had showed her to get revenge for what Jonathan had did. My opinion on The Horror of Dracula from 1958 is that it's another one of those classics that just really can't be remade now these days. Even with films like Bram Stoker's Dracula and Dracula 2000, they just could not master the same things that the original 1958 version of Dracula could do. Although the 1931 version with Bela Lugosi was already a classic, and still to this day is a classic and is the most recognizable Dracula out of the whole series. But it was actor Peter Cushing who brought the role of Dr. Van Helsing to a whole new level. The original Dr. Van Helsing, played by Edward Van Sloan, was a much different character than the character played by Peter Cushing. Over the course of time, many other actors would come to play the character of Dr. Van Helsing, such as Anthony Hopkins and Christopher Plummer. But when you think about it, really, Horror of Dracula was one of the first vampire movies ever to be filmed in color, just like The Curse of Frankenstein was one of the first horror films, to be shot in color. These films, when they were released in their original time, were actually very gruesome and very violent for their time, and were very unusual for the time that they were released in. Nowadays, most people will take that as an effect of being cheesy and will say that the special effects from that time suck. But I don't think they suck. I think they're brilliant. I think they're amazing. And I like the way they were played out. Horror of Dracula takes the violence up just a little bit more than The Curse of Frankenstein did. Since we are dealing with vampires this time, there is much more blood in this film. Although there is not gallons and gallons of blood, but there are scenes that involve lots of blood. For example, there is a scene at the very beginning of the movie, just to start the whole thing off, with Dracula's casket having blood being dripped on it. Which is nowadays a cheesy effect, as it was probably just red paint being added into the shot. But then also we have a scene where Dracula appears and shows off his very scary and frightening face, also with blood dripping off of his fangs, which could be very gruesome and very violent to see, as to see a vampire with actual blood on their fangs. Also, spoiler alert, Count Dracula at the end is killed by having the shades pulled down, and he is burned by the sun, along with being blinded by a cross to push him back into the sun by Dr. Van Helsing. And the scenes where he is decomposing may be a little too gruesome for your young children or for anyone that has a weak stomach. Half of those shots, for fun fact, were actually had to be edited out due to the fact that that at the time it was too gruesome to show that kind of a thing in a movie. But who cares? I mean, it's a movie. It's not like they're actually trying to do something. Sure, the original shots may have shown a little bit more, but they're actually took out. A Japanese film crew actually recently found those shots and are trying to get them restored. I heard the version that was released in the UK actually has those shots restored, and I saw them once for myself on a copy. I can't exactly remember which copy it was. It wasn't a Blu-ray copy. It was just a different copy that one of my friends had that had the original scene of Dracula decomposing. It just pretty much shows his skin rotting away, mostly. But for that time of the era, it was pretty gruesome to show that on screen. So I would say Horror of Dracula is okay for your young children. But you might want to start to think about it as the fact that there is actual blood in the film, and it is in color. Depending on how you want to expose a vampire movie or any kind of movie of this genre to your youngsters, that is up to you. But I would say Horror of Dracula is alright for younger children to see. Although you might want to sit with them if they are under the ages of 12 or 13, if that is what you feel is what you're most comfortable with. But other than that, it's okay. Horror of Dracula is another classic from the 1950s and was a film that also helped revolutionize the genre of horror. It was a film that was very different from its time and everything, and it actually brought the film company to a whole new level of horror. Now a lot of the companies are starting to follow Hammer's example and starting to add just a little bit more into their films and starting to film them in actual color. Only films that are actually considered horror to be filmed in black and white from the 1960s, well, there's actually a few. The most notable ones are Psycho, Night of the Living Dead, and a few others. But those films are also known as classics, as violent as they are. But I would say that Horror of Dracula is a classic, and is a film that if you are an old horror movie fan and you are a fan of Dracula, and if you're a fan of classic movies, this is a film not to pass up. If you're trying to look to find this movie, I would recommend looking for either Warner Brothers version of it, which is on a 4-pack with Dracula Has Risen from the Grave, Taste the Blood of Dracula, and Dracula AD 1972, or you can find it alone on DVD, which might cost you a little more. Or you could pick up the set that I own, which is the TCM set, which I did in another review, which has 2 Dracula and 2 Frankenstein films from the same company. That is all I have to say about Horror of Dracula. Tune in next time when Frankenstein comes back to avenge the creature he made.